Well, g'day folks. Got a 10-inch lift put in the rig, so let's go check it out. Fucking how tight are they? That's how tight ARB have done up my wheel nuts. Wait till I go back in there. I'm going to go back in there today. That's bullshit. Swinging off a rattle gun, I bet you. Rightio, so we got the new suspension fitted. As most of you would know by now, decided to go with ARB MT64s. The main reason I landed on these, pretty much ever since they came to market and I did my research on them, I thought they'd be a good, shock to try out. I've run a lot of different suspension. So with Old Man Emu in particular, I've run the Nitro Charger Sports, I've run the BP51s, and now I'm running these. So I just thought, I'm always open to trying new products, and I always enjoy testing them and seeing how they go. May as well give a brief rundown. Like I said, I've run the Nitro Charger Sports on my previous LandCruiser. I actually didn't run them for that long because I ended up going to BP51s. But the short amount of time I did run them, I was actually really surprised, and I actually really loved that setup. They're a pretty small bore shock. So you would think they could probably overheat pretty quickly with shock fade in the heavy corrugations and everything like that. But I was actually really surprised by them and really liked them. But I didn't run them for very long, so I can't really speak to their longevity or anything like that. But I think most people have a good run with them. They're just basic, solid shocks. And then the BP51s, I ran on my LandCruiser, and again, not for very long because I ended up trading it. But then I had BP51s on my Hilux, which I actually ran for 100,000 Ks. They were absolutely perfect, and I really liked them. 100,000 Ks, a lot of that's rough going. They really did well. The only drama I had with them was the stone guards, copying the rear stone guards, getting hit with a lot of rocks and debris and that kind of stuff, and they would break pretty easily. But the shocks never failed. There was no dramas with them, so they're a bloody good shock. Now it's on to these MT64s. I was even considering going back to the Nitro Charger Sports, but I kind of wanted to, like I said, test something different and just step up to something that's a bit bigger and a bit more of a beefier shock. So I didn't want to go to the BP51s again because they're just so expensive, and they're great, but not entirely necessary. Could I run them? Yes, just didn't really want to. And yeah, I did not want to pay the money. They've gone up in price a fair bit. And I mean, there is more to go wrong. You've got like a external reservoir on them, but I'm certainly not worried about that because, like I said, I did 100,000 Ks and never really had a drama. Start with the name MT64, which means mono tube. That's what the MT stands for, which simply means that this is just a mono piece of pipe, if that's what you want to call it. A single wall, just like that, with a piston inside. The 64 in the name MT64 is for the internal diameter, which is 64 millimeters. So you've got a 64 millimeter piston in there, so 2.5 inch, which is absolutely huge. When you're talking about shocks of that size, you're generally talking about king shocks and that sort of stuff, like where the racing level shocks are. They've got an internal bore that size. So if you were to compare these with the BP51s, the BP means bypass because they're an internal bypass shock with an internal bore of 51 millimeters. So this internal bore, this piston shaft is a hell of a lot bigger than the BP51. As I said, you're looking at 51 millimeters for the BPs and 64 for this here. So this is a much bigger, beefier shock. That's what also drew me to them. When I saw the ARB marketing for them and I saw MT64, I was thinking, oh, I wonder what that stands for. And then when I did my research, I thought, damn, like they brought a serious shock to the market with a 2.5 inch piston. That they really mean business. This chrome shaft is also 22 millimeters, and I believe the BP51's at either 18 or 20 mil. I did know, but I've forgotten, and I've tried to find as much info on the BPs as I can. the little bit of research I did the last couple of days, I couldn't bloody find the shaft thickness for the BPs. I'm sure it's out there somewhere, but I think they're either 18 or 20 mil. So this shock, all in all, I'm just going to say, is a hell of a lot more beefy than the BP51s. I think these here, they are a very solid build. They also use natural rubber bushes, which is just good for shock absorption and noise and vibration and that sort of stuff. Obviously, I haven't had these on for very long. I've done like 500 Ks or something with them. So I can't speak to the reliability of them. But if I had to guess, I would say that they're going to be ultra reliable just because of how beefy they are. So we'll see how the seals last, you know, all that sort of stuff. Can't speak to that yet, obviously. And they're only relatively new to the market, so I don't think many people would have done many hard Ks on these yet. But I think they're going to be a bloody good shock. Just going off the nitros and the BPs, you know. So, as many of you are probably wondering, the main differences between these and the BP51s. The BP51 is a remote reservoir internal bypass shock. So this has no remote reservoir and this has no internal bypass system. That's where I would say the main differences are. Also, the BP51 has the rebound and compression adjustment. They're a very good shock absorber with many more features than this right here. So the BP51 is in a league of its own and it still sits at the top there. If you look at what ARB have said, Nitro Sports are at the bottom. This was designed to slot in the middle between the Nitro Sports and the BP51s. So if you're looking for, you know, old Man Emu gear and you want the premium top of the range stuff, that still is the BP51. But in my opinion, these aren't far behind. The bore is that big that in theory, these probably should have better damping characteristics because you're talking about such a big piston. If the piston's a lot smaller, obviously it's much harder for that to control the spring movement in an efficient manner. So this being a much big, that's why you look at like race shocks on trophy trucks and stuff at 3-4 inches or whatever, they're huge. Obviously they're cycling huge lengths through rough terrain, at high speed. They need a lot of oil to dissipate heat and whatnot, but obviously they need a big, if they were using tiny shocks, they wouldn't have any damping. So the bigger piston really shines. And the remote res of the BP51 it's good because the remote canister is mounted away from the body of the shock. So it aids in cooling. There's more area for the oil to move around. It also means that the nitrogen stays in the remote canister and the internal floating piston that separates the nitrogen from the oil is in the canister. So in theory, you should have more shock travel because you haven't got an internal piston in here, unlike this one. So there is a lot of benefits to the BP. So with the internal piston, which I believe sits down here, separates the nitrogen from the oil, which stops the nitrogen and oil from mixing. But obviously, because there's a piston in here, it gives you a little bit reduced travel compared to a remote res shock absorber. But because these are so big, they hold so much oil that I'm not really worried about shock fade or anything like that. Like I said, I ran the nitros, which are tiny. I think they're only a 35mm bore. I think. Maybe 40. And I never really had a problem with them. They tune those really well. I was really surprised. Different companies use different pistons. This has a digressive piston in it. Some shocks use a progressive piston. If I'm correct, the BP51s use a progressive piston along with the internal bypass system. With a digressive setup, it can be a lot harder to tune the shock to get a nice compliant ride out of it. But because this piston is so much bigger, makes it easier to tune the shim stack and the piston inside the shock. Because there's such a big area for damping, it makes that job easier. So the way this is tuned, and because it's a digressive piston, pretty much these are aimed at control off-road. They should give you very good control. So it's basically a 2-inch lift, but it all came up probably a good 3.5-4 inches, just because the standard gear I ran for 45,000 Ks and it was pretty tired in the end. So it had sagged a lot. So I got a bloody good lift out of it. The 33s are starting to look a bit small now. Kind of want to step up to 35s. just again to try something different. So I don't know, we'll see what happens in the future. So the standard gear served me very well. Like I said, I did 45,000 Ks with it. It was very tired in the end, but it really did me pretty well. And in comparison to running standard suspension on a Hilux, it was a world of difference. Having the Hiluxes loaded up with the standard gear, really didn't like it out bush. You had to be very careful. It was extremely easy to bottom the rig out. This here will do the same if you're driving it too hard, but it handled the rough roads and the weight of the vehicle with all the tools and everything like that a lot better and a lot easier. Now, a couple of things. It is riding a little bit stiff, and I thought this was going to happen because the front is set up for a bull bar. And yes, it does have a bull bar, Toyota factory bar, which is a lot lighter than most steel bars on the market. So I have got a bull bar coming. Hopefully it's not too far away. And that bar is going to weigh a fair bit more than this standard bar. So that should settle the front a little bit because it is a bit stiff, a bit jittery. I definitely noticed that straight away. So as far as the rear setup's concerned, I ended up going with the 600 kilogram constants. And I also like the fact that they're a greasable shackle, so you can keep them lubed up. So yeah, 600's in the back, which I think is perfect. These trays are about 300 kilograms. This canopy's 100 kilograms. That box with tools in it is like 130, 140 kilos. You got jerry cans on the back, the tools on the other side. And obviously the gear that's in here now. Fridge, drawers, and this setup. So I've estimated it all to weigh probably around 700 kilograms. But the back, as you can see from the shackle angle, it is sitting a bit upright. But, you know, it's probably going to settle in a little bit, and it's probably good to have a bit of wiggle room there because the load changes, you know. I'm trying to film, and you guys are noisy. You know that? Anyway, as I was saying, I reckon the back end will probably be right. It gives me a bit of wiggle room because this is how the setup's pretty much gonna stay. But, you know, sometimes I'll have a generator on the back or whatever it may be. Like, we're going to Fink soon. We're going to have all sorts of stuff on the back and a bunch of wood and whatever. So I think it's going to settle in and be all right, I reckon. So the big elephant in the room, you're probably wondering how much it all costs. Look, I was originally quoted about 5.5, 5.6 I think, for the whole kit installed, and I ended up getting it all for 5.3. That's including a wheel alignment. So, I mean, I was pretty happy. Unfortunately, I couldn't do it myself. I really like to do as much as I can with this vehicle, but it was just easy for them to do it. I didn't really have the time, and so I just sent it to them and they got it done in half a day. I'll just run through another couple little features that I almost forgot about. The body of the shock is alloy, which is just like the BP51, which is obviously very good for corrosion resistance and it won't rust like maybe a steel bodied shock potentially could. It also means that being alloy, it's going to be a lot better at dissipating heat, which is really, really important for a shock absorber, for shock fade and all that sort of stuff. The more heat that it can vent to atmosphere, the more efficient the shock is going to run. The shocks are also equipped with a hydraulic top out end zone, which basically means that the shock when you're hitting big bumps and it's at full extension, it should be a lot less harsh with that hydraulic zone in there. One last thing, the radius arms, ARB did put offset bushes in the radius arms, because obviously as you lift the rig, the front diff tends to sit back and under a little bit, and those offset bushes in the radius arms correct that a little bit. However, it isn't perfect. It's not always the best doing that. With the offset bushes, it just means that the pin is no longer through the middle of the bush because the bush is offset a little bit. It's not ideal. It can reduce flex. It's also, I think, the radius arm mounts where they mount to the diff can and have cracked. Depends what bushes you've got in there, poly bushes, rubber bushes, that's a whole nother debate, but it's okay for now. The other thing with having those offset bushes is it's definitely better than stock, but it can give the steering a little bit of a vague feel and a bit wishy-washy, which I have noticed a little bit. What I will do in the near future, hopefully within the next couple of months sort of thing, is I'll probably have to buy myself some aftermarket radius arms. So basically what that means is it'll push the caster to where it should be. The offset, I won't need offset bushes with the aftermarket radius arms. The bushes will remain just as if they were factory, so the pin straight through the middle of the bush, through the middle of the arm. But anyway, once I buy them, I'll obviously install them and show what that's all about. I thought I'd just do a relatively quick, brief video rundown of the setup and maybe talk about it a bit more later on once I do an actual review, once I've put 50,000 Ks on the setup, see if it's any good, see if anything's blown out, see how the ride goes and everything like that. I guess I should say, first impressions, I have done one trip out bush with it, with this setup. It was a world of difference from the standard gear. Way more composed. Obviously it handles the weight a lot better. Like, it's totally different. The standard stuff was very tired, very sagged out and everything like that. So really good control. The whoops in the road handled that no problem. Any dips or gullies just smashed straight through. Smooth, compliant. Like I said, probably a bit stiff for my liking because the front's not quite set up how it should be with the bull bar and whatnot, and I think the rear needs to settle in a little bit. But just, that's my first impressions. I haven't done much driving with it, but I'm happy so far. Anyway, that'll do it, I reckon. Thanks very much for watching, and the next video you'll probably see will probably be the Finke Desert Race 2024. So we're going to head out for that and hopefully get some really good footage and put together a cracker of a video. I'm very excited for that. So let me know if any of you guys are coming up for the race. Anyway, take it easy. Have a good one.